All right, thank you all for coming. Our guest speaker, Miss Jennifer Mintz, is ready to present. So if you guys can please give your time and attention. And at the end, we strongly encourage participation through asking questions or following up, because we've never had a guest speaker talk about precision medicine before. So if this is something that you're interested in, if you want to learn more about it, please don't hesitate to reach out and network. So without further ado.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Nice to meet you. As Matthew said, my name is Jennifer Mintz. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Firma Clinical Research. The company I work for works in the clinical research space. We actually send nurses to the homes of patients who are participating in clinical research. So we ease the burden of the patient. So we'll talk a little bit about clinical research as a whole. What is precision medicine? Answer any questions you might have. I will say I am not on the science side. I am on the sales, marketing, contract side, but I've been in the industry for about 15 years. So I can certainly answer as many questions as possible. If you have anything I can't answer, I can certainly get back to Matthew or Mr. Adolph with answers. So let's start. Who here is aware of what clinical research is by show of hands? Okay. So clinical research is really big in the news right now. Can anybody tell me why? Exactly. I'm actually recovering from my booster from Monday. So every single one of us in this room, whether or not you've had the vaccine or not, every single person in this room has benefited from clinical research. In order to even take a Tylenol or an Advil, or when you go to the doctor and they simply hand you a pack of amoxicillin or a prescription, that has all gone through the process of clinical research. So the world in general has a little bit better understanding of what clinical research is because of COVID-19. So you hear things on the news like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, emergency use authorization, which means a study is not completely approved, but there's an emergency use approval. So in this stage of the game, this is a much better, a well understood opportunity to learn about clinical research compared to 10 years ago when nobody really knew about it. So does anybody know how you can participate in a clinical research study?
You can volunteer for a study where like researchers will give you like if they're like testing out the effect of a pill, they might give you like a placebo pill.
Exactly.
And test like the effects of stuff.
Correct. So if you're sitting in your doctor's office and you see a sign on the wall that says, do you suffer from chronic cough or do you experience XYZ? That doctor is participating in a clinical trial. And if you are experiencing symptoms of something that might be benefited by that clinical trial, you can enroll in a clinical trial at your doctor's office. So it's something that is available to everybody. There's different phases of clinical research. Does anybody know where clinical research starts? It actually starts in animals. Beagles are the most commonly used dogs in clinical research. It's sad, especially if you're a dog owner, to know, but all studies start what they call preclinical. They test it on animals. Sometimes they'll test it. A friend of mine used to work in Penn at the veterinary center, and they used to test heart equipment on pigs. And they would shock the pig and figure out with this medical device if it was working. Then it eventually gets to a human. So it will never touch a human until it has gone through a preclinical study in a dog or any sort of animal that fits the bill. Mice, very common for clinical research. So what do clinical research do? Clinical researchers design, implement, and monitor clinical studies of compounds designed for clinical development. A compound is basically a set of molecules. You probably know that. So there are thousands and thousands of biotechnology companies in the world that have compounds that they're looking to use to solve a problem in this world. So we think of clinical research, you think COVID-19, you might think cancer, things like that. But anytime you set foot in the doctor's office or a hospital, any single thing that goes into your body is studied by a clinical researcher. Things like when you go in, maybe you get a saline drip, even the products that they use and the needle sizes that they use on us are actually studied. So nothing is in your body or touching you that has not been approved by the FDA. I'll pause for any questions on what we've talked about so far about clinical research. Does everybody understand a little bit about clinical research? Okay.
Mind if I just
Absolutely.
If you remember, we had a presentation last year, actually Regan's dad, and he works in research. And one of the things that a lot of that research does, a lot of people have issues with the cost of pharmaceuticals, but a lot of the cost does come from the cost involved in the research that has to be done in advance of all these different treatment forms. So that is a lot of the built-in cost of medicine.
That's a good point. So I'll give you an example. My team this year, part of my team supports business development. We offer just this niche component of home health in clinical research. We've booked almost $100 million of contracts just in that little niche. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And I tell you this because a lot of times when we go to college, right, you guys are all thinking, I want to be pre-med, right? There's nothing wrong with looking at the medical field, and we'll talk a little bit about what this looks like if you don't want to be a doctor, but you want to work on the research side. There's an entire side of the industry where you can work with the molecules, you can work on as a clinical researcher, as opposed to working directly on patients. So it's something just to open your eyes to different parts of the medical field and the industries that are out there, because it is a very stable industry with an aging population. I know you guys are all young, but the population, as you know, with the baby boomers, and then we'll be getting up there at some point, there's always going to be a need to solve a medical problem in the world. So it's an industry that's extremely stable and growing as well. So we talked a little about preclinical versus clinical. When they start with a human, they typically they call it first in man, and that is a healthy volunteer. There are labs that you can check into for 4 or 5 days, get paid hundreds of dollars to participate as a healthy volunteer. Can anybody tell me what kind of study would not take a healthy volunteer? What kind of clinical research study would not take somebody healthy? Possibly. One of the areas, that's a good answer as well, is cancer. You can't be a healthy volunteer because you already have a diagnosis. So there are certain pockets of clinical research where you cannot participate as a healthy volunteer. And there are people, believe it or not, they make a career out of being healthy volunteers. You're basically a human guinea pig. There are a lot of areas actually near college campuses where they have labs. People check into a lab and they get $300 or $400. Now, I can't say as a parent, I'd be like, hey, why don't you go check in for 5 days and take some sort of medicine? You could get a placebo, which is nothing. You could get the medicine. And that is where they're actually finding out what the side effects are. So when you watch a TV commercial and you're looking at, and they're giving you these slew of side effects, like could cause this, that's because that comes from what's called an adverse event when you're in the clinical trial. So for example, I have the booster, I have an adverse event. It's not a severe adverse event. I have, stomach pain, whatever. That would go on a TV commercial when the COVID-19 vaccine gets approved. It's a slew of side effects, and that comes from the clinical research and the adverse events. And it's the responsibility of the pharmaceutical company to report on these adverse events. The severe adverse events, or what's called an SAE in the industry, worst case scenario, unfortunately, there are people who participate in clinical research who do pass away. Sometimes people are in clinical research because it is their last ditch effort to survive. You'll find that people sometimes think clinical research is always the case where you are participating because you have stage 4 metastatic cancer, and this is a Hail Mary to try to put something in your body to help you live longer. However, that's not the case. People participate in clinical research for a variety of reasons. You don't have to have participant who's basically ready to pass away. But that's a lot of times the preconceived notion is that's the only reason to have clinical research. Okay, so talking a little bit about precision or personalized medicine. So I'm going to read the description. It's a form of medicine that uses information about a person's own genes or proteins to prevent, diagnose, or treat disease. In cancer, precision medicine uses specific information about a person's tumor to help make a diagnosis, plan treatment, or find out how well treatment is working or make a prognosis. So does anybody know 5-10 years ago, how did people with cancer get treated? Radiation, chemo. It was the standard. You got diagnosed with cancer, bam, you were in a regimen of chemo and radiation. The challenge with that is that chemotherapy also kills off healthy cells. So obviously the goal is to kill off the cells that have cancer and to eradicate the issues that you're experiencing from cancer and hopefully kill them off to the point where they never come back. However, as time has gone on and science has improved, they've come up with this precision medicine or genomic medicine so that you can better understand what is happening in your body so your doctor knows, will chemo help you? Will radiation help you? So I'll give you a personal example. About 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer and my tumor was the size of a salt crystal. 5 years ago, I would have been in chemotherapy, radiation, and although this little tiny tumor was not necessarily something 5 years ago that I would have needed chemotherapy on, that was what's called the standard of care. You'll hear that a lot in medicine, the standard of care. You go to the doctor, you have something wrong with you, the standard of care, that's what they follow. Well, the standard of care has changed a lot with cancer patients because what they can do, there's companies that exist that focus entirely on precision medicine. This is an extremely advanced approach to medicine. It will become more standardized, but I'll give you an example. This tiny little salt crystal that I had was sent to a lab in California, and I was able to get a report back through my doctor that told me what the benefit would be if I had chemotherapy. How would it have affected my long-term cancer outlook? So for example, when you have cancer and you have chemotherapy or radiation or surgery, it doesn't mean that the cells are ever completely gone from your body. It can come back in another way. So for example, breast cancer can come back metastatically in the brain, the bones, the liver, the lungs. So my genomic testing came back and said that if I had chemotherapy, that I would have a 1% reduction in the risk of my breast cancer coming back metastatically. So that they call an oncotype score. So there's a company, there's only one lab in California that does a specific oncotype score. They send the tumor, they look at the genomic outlook of and the makeup of the tumor. So they look at my actual gene and they're able to say, will chemotherapy benefit or hurt this patient? What's the long-term outlook? So because there was only a 1% reduction in my risk of having metastatic breast cancer in the future, I worked with my doctor and they're like, you know what, don't do it because you're going to kill so many healthy cells and there's so many side effects to chemotherapy that it doesn't make sense to do that to yourself because the risk isn't that high. Now, there are people who come back with high oncotype scores and they have to go through chemotherapy. It's because the way that gene is, or the way that the genomic makeup of that particular tumor is saying that that patient, if they don't have chemotherapy, they will have a higher risk of metastatic cancer in the future. So back in the day, everybody had chemotherapy for cancer. And now with different types of cancers, they're able to use a lab. There's labs all over the world that they send the sample and they're able to look at the genomic makeup of the tumor and make a decision about whether or not you will benefit from chemo or radiation, or mostly chemo because it's a chemical. Any questions on what that means? So this is exciting for the future of medicine, simply because by the time you guys get older, hopefully genomic medicine, precision medicine will be able to solve many of the diseases that are out there, but they're using it most frequently with cancer because chemotherapy is oftentimes considered torturous. People have terrible side effects from it, and they're long term. It's not just I'm doing 12 weeks of chemo and then I'm fine. There's long term effects. So precision personalized medicine is about treating the patient based on their own genetic makeup and the genetic makeup of the tumor that's in their body. Any questions so far on precision medicine? Yes.
So when you say it gets like sent to the lab, how exactly do they determine based on the genetic makeup if chemotherapy would be helpful or not?
That's above my pay grade. I don't in the science part of it. They have some sort of tools that they're using to look at the biomarkers of the tumor and determine if those biomarkers are aggressive enough to have a future risk that's greater or less than one person or the other. Yes.
Are there other disorders that they don't use personalized medicine? Or they just give you
Yes. Because precision medicine is growing, there are a lot of disorders or diseases where they don't have the ability to understand how to use precision medicine. But that's part of why I'm here today, so that you guys see this as, is this something that interests me enough that if I finish high school and go to college, could this be a career choice that I want to make and make a decision of people's future in a different way? Somebody else have a question? Yes. That's a good question. So right now, a lot of you guys have parents my age, right? And you hear like, oh, I got to go for my colonoscopy, right? It's brutal. Everybody has to get it done now that they've lowered the age to 45. It's a terrible preparation. You're knocked out. It's a check of your colon, but it's essential because colon cancer is one of the few things that you can test preventatively. But it is extremely difficult for a lot of people to go through the preparation for a colonoscopy. So a lot of my friends, when I ask them, like, did you get a colonoscopy? They're like, oh God, I don't want to do that prep. So guess what? There are a lot of people, because of the way medicine sometimes works, they're like, I don't want to go through the hassle. So I'm just not going to do it. So the problem is that the reason that colonoscopy screening has reduced from 50 to 45 is because they found more people are getting colon cancer at a younger age. So how do you hopefully prevent that, and how do you make screening easier? So right now there's companies out there that do what's called liquid biopsies. It's a fancy way of saying a blood test. So we work with companies that they can send a nurse to the home, or you can go to the doctor and they will draw your blood, and they're looking for biomarkers in your blood that will tell your doctor if you have early signs or early predisposition for cancer, for colon cancer specifically. So they're working on that for breast cancer as well, so that patients don't have to go for these screenings. Like, people don't want to go through mammograms because it can be painful. There's not a lot of preventative screening that happens for any of us. Colonoscopies, mammograms. What else am I missing? Yeah, like a regular check. That's about it. I mean, if you have something going on with your head, your doctor will eventually send you, or you go through the process of trying to figure out, like, oh, I have headaches, and then they'll send you through all the scans. But there's not a lot of preventative measures out there, and that's what the industry is working on as well. Is how do we use the blood to better determine what's happening in somebody's body and be able to prevent something from happening. So you'll probably see a lot of these advertisements on TV, like the 23andMe and Ancestry. Those are a little bit more commercialized, but there are companies out there that also will test your DNA and your RNA. So when I had it was originally diagnosed, my mom and my sister had breast cancer as well. We all went for genetic testing, RNA and DNA. Nothing in our DNA, nothing in our RNA says that we have a genetic mutation. So you'll often hear about genetic mutations, and people who have them are predisposed to certain types of cancer. There are people who proactively have major surgeries because they have such a strong predisposition for a disease that you can preventatively, like people go and get hysterectomies after they have their children because they know they're at great risk. So precision medicine will give patients the ability to, similar to like a DNA type of test, you'll be able to figure out what's my genetic predisposition for these types of diseases. And it's not just cancer. There are a ton of them, like they'll look for different biomarkers in your blood, but there are so many genes that you cannot rely on one blood test to tell you whether or not, because not every mutation has been studied. So good question. Okay, so this is just a little graphic about the difference between traditional medicine versus precision medicine. And this is just explaining what we just talked about, which is the traditional form was the standard of care. You go in and you have your chemotherapy, your radiation, etc., and that solves the problem. Precision medicine is, you've heard probably of immunotherapy, where they're trying to basically turn on your immune system because your immune system hasn't been able to fight off. And immunotherapy is another way that clinical research is working with patients to try to figure out what's going on in the individual's immune system so that they can fight off whatever cells are attacking their body. Any questions on precision medicine? Yes.
Question. So do you see an avenue in this in terms of nutrition, or are there companies already that are looking at people's genetic profile and their ideal nutritional intake?
Yeah. I've seen companies, I follow a couple companies on LinkedIn that do use nutrition and try to understand also what your blood type is and what type of foods are best for you based on your blood type. I don't think anything is FDA approved. I think there's so many different ways to look at it that I haven't seen anything that's a standard approach for it. But it's interesting because, if you have a colon polyp, they tell you don't eat a lot of red meat, but then if you have low iron, it's eat a lot of red meat. So there's so many different approaches. So I don't think they've landed on anything specific with the diet, but I think that's something where they're headed because I see a couple companies on LinkedIn that are doing that.
Seems like the direction to go.
Yeah, because nutrition, is a big part of what's happening in your body. So who here is interested in only practicing medicine in a traditional approach? Are you guys all thinking of going to school and being on the pre-med track or anything? Okay. So can you work in both traditional medicine and clinical research at the same time? And how do you think you do that? Yes. Absolutely. So if you're a type of person who wants to go to school and study traditional medicine, you can still participate in clinical research. There's doctors' offices all over. They call them sites when you're working in a clinical research. They call them clinical research sites. So what might be your doctor might also be a clinical research site, and patients are going to that same doctor's office and participating in a study. There's a slew of FDA requirements when you're participating in a study. So if you're a clinical research site, you have a whole study team of people who work at that site who help support that patient and the logging of information. So in clinical research, anything that goes to the FDA, I can tell you there are tools, systems, electronic data capture, every type of technology under the sun in order to track what's going on with a patient. So you can't just participate in a clinical research or work at a clinical research site without doing everything that's required by the FDA. So there's clinical trial protocols. You've probably heard of protocols. Everybody know what a protocol is. These are 150-page documents that are written and have to be approved by the FDA, and the patients and the sites that are participating have to follow that protocol. So you can certainly work in traditional medicine and participate in clinical research or be a clinical research site. So if that's something that interests you, I would highly encourage you to take a look at that as a career path in the future. So what kind of careers, if you have degrees in biology, biochemistry, pharmacology, pre-med, nursing, health science, of biotechnology, these are areas of study. You don't have to have a medical degree to be a clinical researcher. If numbers interest you, there's a biostatistics and data management side. There's medical writing. There are people who write protocols for a living. There are people who write things to the FDA to prove the efficacy of a drug. So there's a ton of different areas of career paths that you could take if you go to college. Because I'll be honest, I have a master's degree in hospitality management, and here I am working in clinical research. So there are going to be times in your life where you might pivot and say, this is what really interests me. So I tell you that only because if you go to college and you think this is exactly what I want to do, and it turns out that maybe the career path you're on isn't, I'm trying to just open your eyes to the idea of a different part of clinical research or medicine that exists that is a little bit lesser known in the world. If it weren't for COVID-19, I think it'd be even lesser known. So this is a list of some of the companies, just as an idea. This is just in the North Carolina area that focus on clinical research. So you can work for massive organizations, clinical research organizations. They're called CROs. They run the study with the sponsor, the pharmaceutical company. So there's a whole component of running the study through a clinical research organization, or there's the whole scientific side of working as the actual clinical researcher for a pharmaceutical company. So there's a ton of career opportunities because clinical research will never go away. Precision medicine is what is the future of clinical research now for cancer, but in the future for other types of disease states. And you will never have a problem finding a job in clinical research. I can tell you, it is an extremely popular and interesting approach to your career. So I would encourage anybody who is interested in this career path to consider taking classes in college that might interest you if this is something that is a potential career path for you. And last,
just a sidebar to add that my wife works at she's in a CRO. She works for ERA. They just got bought out. She works in regulatory affairs, and she can't find people.
Yeah.
She just can't find people to do the job, and they get paid a lot.
A lot. A lot. People who work for me are making well into the six figures. Some of them they're in their 30s. I mean, you don't have to take that long to get there. But if you're driven by that as part of your career, because obviously there's if you're in this field, you're interested in helping people. But there's obviously a financial benefit to it, and the regulatory piece is interesting. I mean, clinical research is different in different countries. So in the United States, it's allowed in a lot of different settings. Like in Italy, it's not allowed in the home. So somebody like your wife has to know all of these little components of what's happening around the world for clinical research, because it's not standard across the world. It's different in different pockets of the
She's up
country.
at all hours having meetings, and she'll have meetings with someone in Sudan, and then
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
She has a much more interesting job than
Yeah.
no.
No offense. Right. If my contact information is on the slide. My daughter is back there, Sydney. She's a senior, Roll Tide. She's going to Alabama. She told me not to say that, but she can't stop me because she's back there. You can always figure out a way to contact me. I'm always happy to help answer any questions that you guys might have. If you're in college in 3 or 4 years and you're like, I want to ask, Jen about a question about this, happy to help, because I think it's an extremely rewarding area, because ultimately you are part of saving somebody's life potentially.
And just to add to
Yeah.
that, just a quick piece of it, I'm one of those people. I'm on a targeted drug right now. I have leukemia presently, but it's on the way out, thankfully. But I caught it early, and I'm on this targeted drug that is this technology that didn't exist. And if this were 20 years ago, I would be probably not okay. So
Yeah.
This is the research. So a lot of times people think medical, they think doctor, and doctors are extremely important. But doctors are one piece of the puzzle, and the actual treatment comes from the discoveries made in the lab. And people like me would be in big trouble without it. So, yeah.
And so I encourage you, there's a website called clinicaltrials.gov. It's a little bit clunky to read through, but it will list out the millions and millions of studies that exist. People study anything under the sun. And this is an article that I saw this morning on genomic medicine or precision medicine that's specific to breast cancer. It just happened to come through. But it's just something that is so hot topic in the industry. It's something to read through to understand a little bit about what the studies look like. So can I answer any questions for you? we'll go in order. Nina, I know Nina, that's why I know her name. Yes, go ahead. You can certainly ask your doctors if they are participating in any study, or you can actually go on clinicaltrials.gov and look at studies that would fit your criteria. So there's something in clinical research called IE criteria. It's called inclusion exclusion criteria. So if they're studying a pediatric drug and it's between the ages of 12 and 16, and there's a lot of other criteria they might look for, you might have to have a certain BMI, whatever the case may be, then you can participate in that study. You would have to contact the doctor that's hosting that study. Sometimes because they're so specific on location of the patient, it's not always a possibility. I wanted to participate in a study, but geographically it wasn't something that made sense. So you can certainly look online to see if there's any studies that fit your criteria, or ask your doctors. Yep. Yes, Matt. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. We're gonna, yeah.
So if say I wanted to go into precision medicine in the field, what kind of courses should I take in college?
Biology courses, biotechnology, anything on the science track, pre-med, anything on that track will help you. And there could be colleges and universities that actually have this as a major. I don't know if they have it yet. I know that there are some that have very specific medical sub-studies or minors. So something to take a look at, and I'm certainly happy to help with research that with you as well. Yes.
You mentioned in the beginning how you do more of like marketing, sales side.
Yeah.
So how does that, what is it every day? What is it day?
Yeah. So from the sales, marketing, contracts, and proposal side, I manage a team of people. I started off. We look for pharmaceutical companies that are looking to buy our services of home health care. So if you're interested in the sales side, extremely exciting opportunity, because you're basically selling something. So right now, the really hot topic in the clinical research space is wearables. So there are companies out there that are creating wearables where you would be selling a wearable to a pharmaceutical company like Merck, because that wearable might be applicable to one of the studies that they're using, and that wearable collects clinical research data and would use that data for ultimately getting that drug approved. So that's more the sales side, is selling the clinical research services or something that will benefit the patient or the operation of the study. So a typical day is sales pressure. Yes. Where, what's that? Yeah, pockets of the US, I would say hubs are Cambridge, Boston area, RTP, Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. There's a lot of labs in Texas, not a lot of pharmaceutical companies, and then the whole San Diego and San Francisco area of California. That's where pockets of the country have a lot of concentration in clinical research. However, with the pandemic, you can kind of work anywhere, but that's a lot of times where the headquarters are. Internationally, I'm not as familiar with some of the companies. There's always companies, and we've flown over and met with companies in Germany, they're in England. So if you're looking for international, what you can do is find a company that interests you. If you're interested in Merck, they have a whole subsidiary called EMD Serono that's international. I believe they're in Germany. So you can always look at a company that's US based and see where their international headquarters are as well. Yes. No, that's more medical technology, medical device. That is it's the use of a precision tool, but it's precision medicine is more related to the patient's genetic makeup. But it's a good question. Because if anybody is interested in medical devices, if you are interested in going into medical device sales, you're in scrubs, you're in an operating room, and you're looking at the implementation of this medical device, whether you're watching somebody insert a knee or put in some sort of pump. So when you're if you don't want to go into the medical side, but you're interested in seeing the impact of maybe a medical device, a a lot of times medical device salespeople are in the hospital and the operating room. Yes.
How did you find out about precision medicine? And how did you?
It just kind of came into the industry while I was already in it, to be honest. It was when you work in clinical research, things change, and the ways that we solve the problems and study diseases will always be evolving. So I don't actually sell precision medicine. I sell home healthcare to clinical trial patients so that when you're participating in a study, you don't have to leave your house. But precision medicine, when you work in clinical research, articles like that, there's a ton of websites and ton of newsletters that get delivered to you every day. And these things just start becoming more and more popular. And they kind of take on a whole new life. And all of a sudden there's a niche provider for precision medicine. So there are companies out there called Oncotype, Invitae. There are certain companies that's all that they do. So if it's something that you wanted to do specifically, I'm happy to help research specific companies that specialize in precision medicine. There will be a ton more by the time you guys are in and out of college. Yes. For now, yeah. I think it's any type of, I think once they're able to identify the genetic makeup of a patient and determine where there's a mutation, then they can start focusing on some precision medicine that's related to it. So right now, I think it's cancer because they're trying to change the standard of care. But I think that there's a ton of other areas of focus. Believe it or not, everybody who has had a blood transfusion has participated in precision medicine. This has been around for a really long time. And the reason I say that is because when you've gotten a blood transfusion, if hopefully you've never needed one, but if it's blood type A positive, blood type B positive, that is because they're taking your blood and they're matching it with somebody who's donating it. So the idea of precision medicine isn't new. It's how they're applying it to different disease states. And that's where there's a lot of growth because there's a ton of diseases that you and I wouldn't even think of. Well, I'm talking more about the ones that are more commonly studied right now, which is oncology. But I imagine that it'll be the same way. They're looking at biomarkers for diabetes so that type 1, type 2 diabetes patients are able maybe not use insulin. And there's something that a medicine that they can use to not have to take insulin. And what's the genetic makeup of these people so that they can kind of solve this problem without having to manage it for the rest of their life with insulin. So there's going to be a lot of other areas of diseases where this is studied. I know prostate cancer is one of them as well. Again, oncology, but still a different area. Yes.
So, for example,
Yeah.
do you expect to be a part of the
No. Typically, clinical researchers, like it depends on if you wanted to be, if you don't want to be a PhD and participate, you can be a clinical researcher in the lab, you can be a clinical researcher at a pharmaceutical company and not have to actually participate in the clinicals or things of that nature. I would recommend, colleges, like I said, like I think one of the colleges that Sydney was looking at had like a medical technology, health analytics, medical technology minors. So I think if you look at when the time comes, work with your counselor, I'm happy to help as well. Look at colleges that have a career that's special, or maybe a study that specializes in clinical research. You'll get a better understanding of what that looks like. Right now, there's no major in clinical research. It's there's areas that you could apply, like Sydney's likely going to have a business major with a healthcare analytics minor because that's a growing area. So there's a lot of different areas that you can go into with clinical research. Excellent. Well, definitely feel free, seriously, to contact me, my personal email, my work email. I'm on LinkedIn. If anybody has LinkedIn, I know sometimes you guys are a little bit young. I do encourage you to create LinkedIn profiles your senior year. It's really good to network. This is an extremely growing industry, and I'm happy, even years down the road when you're in college, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help somebody kind of help find their way in the space and their career.
so much.
Thank you.
I think so.